rod was a dirty word, and it was short, so it made headlines.
Every time an old car was in a wreck, it was hot rod injures 3.
42 old women run down by hot rods.
We were bait for the police in a way in those days.
Street racing was a big thing. They'd hold 10 or 20 races, and as soon as the cops came, all the roadsters would take off through the bean fields, and the cops were driving old Nash bathtubs, and they couldn't catch them.
When you mention hot rod to someone, the car that comes to mind is a 32 Ford Highboy, like the McGee Roadster.
The McGee car is a quintessential American hot rod.
A lot of people probably consider it the most significant 32 Ford hot rod. It just has a presence.
My idea of hot rodding is you take something that isn't worth a whole lot and you improve it as much as you can, and you personalize it at the same time.
When you really think about hot rodding and how important it was to our American heritage, it's major. These were the guys that were some of the great innovators in the automotive world. That story needed to be told.
Hot rodding is a purely American activity. Everybody has a little bit of competition in them.
These young guys found out if you got a Model T or Model A, the first thing you did was strip off all the extra parts, because if you make it lighter, it'll go faster.
When we were 12 years old, that'd be 1933, we'd see in our neighborhood a little stripped down Model T. I said, boy, what could be more fun than to ride around a little homemade racing car like that?
That's what I want to do. Build a roadster like one of those and drive it up through the sequoias and no top, and with your girlfriend. What would be better?
We had our roadsters and we street raced and did the whole bit. Of course, didn't have a wonderful reputation, but we had a lot of fun and we didn't get into jail too much.
We just liked the freedom of the open air driving and playing like we have a racing car.
The hot rod motivation is to build it, drive it, have fun with it, do all these things that it can do. The only rule is it must be modified. You can't go to the factory and buy a hot rod.
I think there was a camaraderie about hot rodders. It was all the common goal to have a nice car and a fast car.
They taught each other, the tricks of this, what at the time they were called hop-ups or gow jobs.
A lot of the development came from just trying things, This was uncharted territory, so it was open for ingenuity.
They could make manifolds to put 2 carburetors on, and they learned how to grind camshafts with files. And we were to the point where, like in my hometown, somebody down the hill fired up his car. Oh, that's Cena's '56 Chevy. Oh man, he's got a new cam in that thing. I can hear it. Your car should be personalized to make it different from any other. You don't want to copy somebody else's hot rod, even no matter how much you like it.
Whether it's color, stance, style, immediately your thoughts are, how do I distinguish my car?
Some were greasy mechanic type guys, and some were neat guys that always had extra clean stuff. There was no money before the war. It was tough. We didn't know it was tough because we're used to that.
It was primarily young men working with what was available. Guys went to go to the junkyard and they pick out what they could find.
The junkyards were full of many different makes at the time. You could buy a Model T in those days for $10 and get it running,
It started here in Southern California partly because of the abundance of roadsters here because of the good weather, and roadsters were the cheapest and lightest and most streamlined of all the cars. And pretty soon they found the dry lakes.
They would get wet with an inch or two of water, and that would erase all the tire marks, and when it dried up, it'd be smooth again.
Muroc Dry Lake was actually the center of activity because you could take a car up there and go as fast as you wanted to go without traffic or people or anything else. El Mirage was the second best lake to Muroc, and they still run there today.
They'd have these meets up there, and you'd meet new guys and see new cars that you'd never get to see otherwise. You'd learn a lot.
You couldn't afford to have 2 cars, so you build your car to run up at the dry lakes, but it also had to come back and drive on the street.
There's no sponsorship to speak of, and there's no prize money whatsoever. So it's the purest form of hot rodding, is straightaway dry lakes and Bonneville racing. When it first started, they would race 4 or 5 cars across the lake bed. Well, if you were first, it was okay, but if you were 5th, you had a hard time seeing where you were going.
So they had to stop that. That was getting too risky. Only the guy in front could see, and these guys are crazy thinking that, don't worry, I'll pass them later.
So in 1937, the Southern California Timing Association was formed to give some regulation and some safety to that activity, and they went one car at a time.
This is legal hot rod racing. There is no speed limit here. The idea is to go as fast as you can against a common opponent, the clock.
They made rules and classes. It was to organize all these various clubs that were founding members. Road runners, bungholers.
The throttlers and the cam breakers, and these various clubs could join.
There was a lot of innovation. And then along came World War II.
On December 7th, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterward.
That kind of stopped hot rodding a little bit short.
Basically, all auto racing was ceased in the United States.
So now all these fellas that used to race at the dry lakes usually worked with government equipment during the war and learned a lot more about engines and so forth.
Guys learned how to fabricate and weld.
During the war, they'd all have a picture of their girlfriend and a picture of their hot rod in their wallet, and they'd be talking about racing these things on the dry lakes and how much fun it was. The term hot rod did develop sometime during World War II, and nobody really knows exactly where it came from, when.
Wally Park said he first heard it in the Philippines. Another serviceman from up in San Luis Obispo used it. He had never heard it before.
When the war shifted from the European to the South Pacific, they all shipped through Long Beach, San Diego, and they'd see these roadsters bombing around on the streets. And the Army, the Navy, spread this word, and after the war, it just blossomed.
That was a great time to be in Los Angeles. They'd survived the war, they'd been in prison camps, they'd been shot at, had some extra money in their jeans, and they were happy to be home. That was the boom, and the dry lakes racing was huge.
The meets were so big up there that there'd be literally hundreds of cars and thousands of spectators.
It was booming. All these people had talent, needed a new hobby, and by God, this was it. Cars.
When the GIs came back, they went to work, and the car that was their first choice was the 32 Ford because it was the perfect platform for hot rodding.
The 32 Ford was the first Ford that came with this V8 engine, which was an affordable V8 that the public could buy. It would be like if Ford brought out a self-driving car today. It was that monumental.
Now here we are in about 1938 or 9, and that engine looked like a racing engine does. In the junkyard, we bought one for $65.
It was much more streamlined, much more designery looking. It looked sleek and it looked brawny at the same time.
Amazingly enough, it looked good when you took the fenders off too. It looked good pretty much whatever you did to it.
At that point, a lot of people had started to find ways to improve the looks of a 32 Ford Roadster. And I think the McGee Roadster exemplifies the pinnacle of that. Bob McGee was a football player at University of Southern California. He always had a love for cars. He took time out to go to war, and when he came back, he jumps right in to building this car. And like all hot rodders, Bob McGee tried new stuff.
A lot of it he did himself, obviously, but some of the characteristics of that car were done by professionals and made it the distinctive car that it is. He was thinking outside the box.
The McGee car was like the Ferrari of hot rods at the time. There was only one that even was remotely like it. I mean, it was clean, it was pretty, and it reeked of that hot rod look. It sat right. They notched the frame in the back and got the back end down to where the body line and the tire were concentric, and I worked to get my car to sit that good, and it doesn't. That handmade three-piece hood, his was one of the first to have it. It had no hinges and no latches visible on it. Just little things like that set it apart.
A lot of styling cues on hot rods come from race cars. So the louvers, in addition to increasing cooling, they're a styling touch similar to what an Indianapolis car would have.
There's no radiator cap on the radiator. It's peaked. The spreader bar, which supports the two front frame horns, is V'd. It has no exterior door hinges.
It took a lot of engineering to make that work.
They took off the door handles so they didn't show, so it was just a smooth body style all the way through.
It has a completely redesigned dash with a big tack in the middle. The trunk and the rear line goes all the way down to the end of the body. It's not broken up by a panel.
He cut it on down, took that panel out, and had a special deck lid formed that matched perfect but went all the way down. The license plate and the rear tail lights were mounted right in the deck lid itself.
It just took that one line out of the car. It's a double take. Even subconsciously, you know the car looks cleaner and smoother. That's a badge of courage. That's a marked distinction.
As unique as the car was stylistically, the engine was just the same. It has a 21 stud flathead with Federal Mogul copper heads, a special Burns intake manifold. So the car wasn't just skin deep.
It had enough performance to say, you know, it's definitely a hot rod.
Bob McGee just looked like the all-American boy. He was married with this car. He took his honeymoon in this car. It's the enthusiasts that wanted to make changes, make him go faster, that have really built our industry in the U.S. And it was the enthusiasts like Bob McGee that took a standard platform 32 Ford Roadster and tweaked it to become an icon. In the late 40s, there were a lot of hot rods roaming the streets of Southern California. And hot rodders were not always welcome. And then along came Bob Peterson, who went out to the dry lakes, took some great pictures, and kind of started a newsletter, which then became Hot Rod Magazine.
Robert E. Peterson was pretty brave in 1948 to found a magazine called Hot Rod because it was a pejorative term. It was really a risky proposition, but it worked for him.
Within 3 years, it was selling, like 3 million copies, and he was a millionaire.
There was a magazine that, of course, really built hot rodding. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and we were able to see what was actually happening there in Southern California and where we could get parts. I happened to pick up the October issue, and that's where I first ran across a picture of the Bob McGee Roadster.
What makes any hot rod significant is being on the cover of Hot Rod Magazine. Everybody in the country saw this car and the way it sat and the way it was built.
This car was photographed in front of USC. So you've got a soldier, a scholar, a football star, all wrapped up into one package right there in front of a very iconic university.
But to the public in the late 40s and early 50s, hot rods were somewhat representative of a menace.
Yeah, they knew I was around now, all right. You should have seen them scatter.
These hot rodders had gotten in so much trouble with the cops that the SETA clubs and Hot Rod Magazine, with Wally Parks leading the way, said, man, we got to clean up our image.
All the hot rod clubs got together with law enforcement to express their concern over safe driving and image. And they selected this car to lead the pack. So on each car, they would put a safety sticker, a green cross, on the windshield. And this was a big, big day for the legitimacy of the sport.
After McGee, there was a fellow named Dick Hirschberg. He was a motorcycle and roadster guy. He was a friend of Von Dutch. He got the car and then in 1955 painted it a pale yellow color and put the new Chevy V8 in it. That has to be one of the first 32 Fords that got an engine swap with a Chevy V8, which of course they built literally millions of, and it became the basis for all kinds of racing and hot rodding from then on.
And then it went to Dick Scritchfield.
I was driving down the street in Hollywood and saw this yellow Roadster sitting in a service station. I thought, boy, that's a pretty neat looking car. And I says, hey, would you be interested in trading your Roadster for a Lincoln Continental? And he says, oh, yeah, it looks pretty nice. I'll give you $800 in a Roadster for the Continental. Well, I figured I was going to have to pay him for the car. And the way I went, and I was a proud owner of a 1932 Ford Roadster.
When Scritchfield got the car, he kept updating it with newer engines and different paint jobs.
He had the pipes going out the sides.
The outside headers, actually, I think they were for a boat originally, and he turned them upside down and used them on the Roadster, and they worked fine.
Eventually, I decided to build a new engine for it, a 350 Chevy. That was sure a good engine. It just ran and ran and ran. Go up to 8,000 RPM and sit there, never miss a beat.
There was a new process called metal flake paint.
And it was the first metal flake in the country. Ducommun Chemical came out with a ground up aluminum, and they found a way to shoot it through a spray gun. You could put a real sparkly finish.
So it went from the pale yellow to the metal flake red, and he ultimately ended up painting it black. In the late 50s, the street rodding was dying off a little bit. He got together with a couple other guys that had roadsters and decided they'd form a club, and that became the LA Roadsters.
He was a doer, he was a leader, and idea was, we're going to drive these goddamn things. That's what they're for. They were a known hot rod club, and they put on this show at the Hollywood Bowl parking lot starting in '57.
We were able to really start a complete industry, and it's just grown and just keeps going, you know.
Not only was he leading all these runs with the LA Roadsters, there were all these hot rod B movies.
One of the studios is looking for a roadster for a movie, and I said, well, I'd be available. And so the first movie was Hot Rod Gang.
And the first thing they're doing is they're banging hubcaps, and the next thing they challenge each other to ride the curbs, and they're going up and down where the driveways are.
I kept thinking they were going to hit one of the light poles or something. It made me a little nervous, I'll admit.
Whenever they needed a hot rod, it was Scritchfield's car. He put it in movies, he put it in TV shows, he put it in ads. It was ubiquitous.
I don't want my baby mixed up with these drugged strips and hot rods.
Mom, that's drag strips and hot rods.
And it accomplished stardom as the Scritchfield Roadster.
I got a good life. I got my job, car, I got the boulevard.
It was in tons of shows. I saw it in shows.
Thanks, Fonzie.
Sometimes I drove, and sometimes it was a stuntman or the actor driving.
Wow, this is the deuce.
This car was in a lot of movies and TV shows over the years, a lot.
Eddie, I declare this is the prettiest little car I ever did see. And he put it together all by himself. That's what's so wonderful.
It was a lot of fun.
It very well should be called the McGee Scritchfield Roadster because Dick Scritchfield accomplished more in performance with the car than Bob McGee did.
In the late 60s, he became interested in dry lakes and Bonneville racing, and he lobbied SCTA, and in 1971, they formed some street roadster classes.
We put the record, we ran through it 168, and they couldn't believe that a street roadster would really go that fast. That was great fun.
I've been well over 200 miles an hour at Bonneville, and when I think of going 167 miles an hour in this car, I'm not sure I have what it takes. Going that fast in a street roadster is a real accomplishment.
Turn the key and go 167 miles an hour. It was pretty amazing.
They always said I jinxed the record because I held the record 9 years before they broke it, and then they finally just made complete race cars that were not street driven or anything else, so I felt pretty good about that.
He retired to Hawaii. Well, Hawaii had a strict fender law at that time, so he decided he'd sell the Roadster.
Then I get over here, and like 2 years later, they changed the law, and fenders aren't required anymore. So I got had. I was sorry I did that at that time. They were all good memories with that car. I do miss it. It was a big part of my life. I like driving fast, and I like fooling with cars, and that makes me a hot rodder, I guess.
To find a car like this with the original everything, body, doors, hood, chassis, is very, very rare, that it hasn't been modified beyond recognition and beyond restoration. And so making the decision, when I bought the car, which point to restore it to, I picked the McGee car because this was a pivotal time. It was so well known in the history of hot rodding, and it just defined style.
Bruce located Bob McGee. He lived down in Fountain Valley, which isn't very far away, but nobody had really talked to him in a while. He brought his scrapbook and contributed his knowledge and so forth to the project. Sadly, he didn't live to see it completely restored, but he knew it was in the process and was going to be restored. And it's as accurate as it's possible to make it. I think it's just spot on.
This car represents generations of innovation. Hot rodding is all American, has baseball, jazz, apple pie, and it was almost forgotten. There was a real underappreciation for the cars and personalities behind the hot rod movement. I think one of the turning points was when Pebble Beach accepted hot rods, along with Duesenbergs and Rolls Royces and Ferraris, as a very acceptable art form. The U.S. Post Office put this car on a postage stamp because this car has depth. I mean, this car has done it all. And I realized when we leave this planet, we take nothing with us. In fact, we're just custodians for icons like this.